Hello, welcome. Today we're going to talk about creative emotional intelligence. So, what is that? And what does emotional intelligence even have to do with creativity? Let's begin by talking a little bit about what our feelings and emotions are and defining emotional intelligence. So, Audre Lorde, an amazing writer and activist, says, "Our feelings are our most genuine paths to knowledge." And I completely agree with this. I think a lot of times the impetus to writing or creating anything is really beginning in a place of feeling. We feel something, we respond to it on the page or in our art, we explore it. So what is the difference between feelings and emotions? Why does this matter? And what does this have to do with our art? Lots of questions. Let's dive into some answers. So essentially, one way to think about the difference between a feeling and an emotion is that a feeling is something that you automatically feel. So you may see a car barreling towards you on the freeway and you get scared. You feel a feeling. Now, if you're driving and everything is fine and you happen to see a similar car a week later and there's no threat and you get scared, that is an ingrained emotion. It's a feeling that is a little bit more permanent. This is a really good way of thinking about it. So once we understand the difference, we understand that emotions are the things that we're kind of replicating in our mind, we can start to unpack this idea of what emotional intelligence is. Now, I've taught leadership at university for the last few years, and one of the things that the students are most interested in is what emotional intelligence is and how we can learn skills around it. So essentially, emotional intelligence, and you can define it slightly differently, but it's the recognition in self and others of emotions and an ability to manage and better our relationships, again, both with self and with others. And we do this through self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and relational management. So Daniel Goleman has done a lot of research in this area. He's got quite a few books on emotional intelligence, and by really breaking emotional intelligence down into 4 or 5 component parts, depending on the way we look at it, we're able then to start to create strategies around how to become more self-aware, how to manage our own emotions in a productive way, how to raise empathy, become more empathetic, and then ultimately this all leads to better relationships. We also get better at observing and understanding when others may be going through perhaps extreme emotions, how we can be more supportive, these kinds of things. So again, what does all of that have to do with creativity? What do feelings and emotions and all of that have to do with writing specifically? Well, emotions and feelings, but mostly emotions, the things that are a little bit more embedded in us, are fire. They're fuel. They're where we get the steam and the urge and the reason to write. But the paradox is that emotions are only benefiting our ability to storytell or to create anything artistic if we're able to examine them. We cannot create great art by getting stuck in extreme thinking. And that may be a bold statement to make, but I stand by it. It's my personal belief and my observation as, just being a reader and being someone who's taught writing for quite a long time as well. We cannot really create our best work if we're stuck in extreme thinking. So if we're in this space of reactivity, for instance, if we're trying to write about a traumatic experience from our past, sometimes we can be a little bit too emotional in the sense that when we write, it just feels like a release. It doesn't actually feel like anything more than a release. And that can be beautiful. Therapeutic writing is beautiful. But there is a difference between writing for therapy for ourselves and writing to share. So, thinking about emotions as something that are deep-seated and that come from within, let's move forward a little bit and talk about how we can write from our wounds, write from this place of total emotion as a starter point. All right, so write what stimulates you, write your anger, write to release, let it all out of the body, out of the mind. Writing from our wounds is exploratory. It's emotional writing that allows us release and maybe perspective. A lot of times, if I've written about something that's really bothering me or that I feel very emotional about, once I write it, I'll reread it and it'll almost feel as though it's a different person. So this is kind of how the therapeutic nature of writing works. We can heal through writing. We can channel our writing into fiction and poetry. So if we've had a traumatic experience, we may want to depict that metaphorically and find some kind of power or control over the situation in that way. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our first exercise, writing from our wounds. So we're going to really embrace this idea of writing from a place of pure emotion. So I invite you, and please don't overthink, really just let the guttural emotion go. I want you to write about a time that you had an overwhelming wave of emotion. So what triggered it? What did it feel like? Really see if you can recreate that feeling on the page. And we're just going for a few paragraphs, 10 minutes. So write as much as you can and meet me back here in the next module. All right, so how did that go? How did it feel? How did it feel to just allow a pure guttural release on the page or in whatever art form that you decided to create? Now, what we're going to do is just taking this as a foundation, we're going to explore how to write from a slightly different perspective. So the whole idea of emotional intelligence, at least in my estimation, is assuming something of a luxury of time and perspective, and it's a muscle that you need to build. We're not going to automatically be able to self-manage and understand how other people are feeling all the time. There are inherent limitations to this. Assuming we know how other people are feeling, or assuming we even know, or even assuming we really have deep insight into our own emotions, can be something of a mistake. So what we need to do is explore from a place of curiosity. So what I propose next is to consider what it would mean to write rather from a place of a wound or a place of, extreme emotion, even if it's positive. Let's look at something from a little bit more distance. So let's talk about what it might look like to write from a place of more emotional intelligence. So this could be writing our hero or heroine's journey. So this could be kind of looking at the arc of our personal life, of the story we want to write, and looking at both the perils and the power. So when we write from a place of exploration, reflective writing allows clear focus and objectivity. And in the way that I'm defining this, creative emotional intelligence combines logic, emotion, empathy, and considers all people, including the people who will read your work down the line. So here is a quote by Melissa Febos, author of Bodywork, which I think shows a change in perspective when writing about creative nonfiction, writing about our past from a place of, as she puts it, an oh well attitude, saying that, there's some kind of moral imperative to have a vision as an artist and to write about our own experience, to a place that is more deliberate, more multifaceted, that considers an issue not just from the emotion itself, but from a little bit more complex perspective. So I'll give you a moment to read this quote. And you can always pause if you're continuing to read. And what I'd like to do is use that kind of shift of perspective as a way of just kind of summarizing what we've gone over so far. So what again is emotional intelligence in writing or any creative venture? Well, first we have to understand that emotion is often a reason for wanting to write, understand, share our stories, share our truth. The process is, the writing itself, the ideas, the outlines, the progressions, the whole thing, the technicalities. Perspective is empathy, considering the impact of our writing, considering the audience, taking ownership, and looking at things from different angles. And when you combine all of these things, we have emotionally intelligent and emotionally impactful writing. So this is the formula. Another quote here, Viktor Frankl. So he founded logotherapy, and I think that this quote is really a beautiful encapsulation of a lot of his writings. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And I think that as an artist, as a writer, it's important to consider the challenge of changing the way that we see material, that we see certain things that create any kind of very extreme emotion in us. So Viktor Frankl, in his search for meaning, in Man's Search for Meaning, and in other texts, talks about the search for meaning in a way that is a primary facet of being. His theory is that if the search is unrequited, it leads to neurosis or the spinning of wheels. And so the greatest task in life is to find meaning. So you can find it in contribution, and you can find it in caring and understanding and courage during difficult times. So I bring this particular perspective up because I think that another important component of this, and inherently tied into this model of emotionally intelligent and emotionally impactful writing, is this idea of courage. So we have to find courage on the page. Okay, so we've talked a lot. We have our just kind of emotional dump of a piece of writing, and that might have some real wonderful nuggets in it, might have some real ideas to spin off. Now I'd like to write from a place of distance, write from a place of exploration. So let's go ahead and dive into exercise part 2. Let's write about the original topic, so the same topic that came up in exercise 1, but do it purposefully from a place of exploration, courage, and meaning. I want you again to go for about 10 minutes and just get a few paragraphs on the page and see if you can tackle that same thing that just feels like an emotional powder keg in your body, and just really focus on the exploratory nature of your writing, of the topic. See if you can look at it from different angles. And when you're done, meet me back here and we will debrief. All right, beautiful job. That last exercise may have been very difficult for some of us. It is an incredibly valuable exercise, even if it didn't feel like it went well and you didn't write great, literature from that particular exercise, one thing that you did do is you exercised a muscle, you exercised your creative EI. So now we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling and relationships. So we've talked a lot about sort of the self-awareness components of creative EI, and now I want to talk about the gift of perspective, the ability and privilege to storytell, and what growth or change comes from processing extreme emotion. Why should we even do this? Why should we even care to dissect what it is that we're feeling? Why not just create from a very technical standpoint? Well, computers can do that for us. We have algorithms to tell stories for us that follow that model. What we need is the human experience. Emotion equals change, either positive or negative. So we need to remember that it is important. It's important to explore and tell this story from a place of knowing. So let's talk a little bit about how we can develop a relationship with our readers through this emotion. So one way to think about this is that instead of bearing our souls or showing up naked on the page or whatever other analogies are often used, or putting our baby out there in the world when we publish a book, for instance, instead of using these very kind of vulnerable analogies, how about we look at it as an opportunity to deepen our relationship with people that we may not ever meet? An opportunity to confide in them and to have a discourse that spans beyond a single moment in time. So reframing in this way may help you to approach an emotionally sensitive topic, an emotionally important topic, in a different way. So in the next module, we'll do a little wrap up. Please know that you are doing a wonderful job moving forward and exploring the tough subjects on the page. Not everybody is willing to do this, but the way that storytelling is and needs to be in the future in a human capacity is by leveraging what only humans have to offer, and that is our emotional resonance, our ability to connect through our vulnerability as well as the strength that comes from emotion.